Can you tell us about the ayahuasca experience? Because I always love hearing about that.
Yeah, of course. Like, I've done it a few times. So, like, once the first time was in Costa Rica, and I was with a shaman. It was just me and my husband. We did like a private ceremony with a shaman and like his team, and it was wild. Like the first night, I just slept through the whole thing, and my husband Martin turned in like it was crazy. Like I didn't know what was going on, but he turned into a jaguar. Like I didn't see
Okay, that's
it.
gonna be
I
good to
didn't see
know.
him. Yeah. But he like things were going on. I was like really scared because I hadn't seen him in this like kind of possessed way. But like afterwards, what he shared with me was like he was like inducted into the tribe, and he had become a jaguar, and he'd become a man, and he had this whole like set of instructions.
Hey guys, welcome back to the show. I'm Mario.
And I'm Peter.
And I'm Adrian.
And we're
Guys That Listen.
On today's episode, we have the founder of Parasol LA, artist, producer, and private equity advisor, Nolo Grace.
Yeah, Nolo Grace is my artist name. My actual name is Grace Hong. And yeah, I spend about half my time doing consulting at a private equity firm, and then the rest of my time focusing on building Parasol, which is a creative community. I have two artist projects. One is my solo project, Nolo Grace, and then I have a band with my husband called Grace Emoji, which is all about like healing our relationship through music. And I'm on a nonprofit board. The nonprofit's called Save the Music.
That's
a
wow. You
long
got
list.
I got a lot of different things going on.
Let's start from the top then. Tell us a little bit about the private equity advising. What is it exactly, and how'd you get into it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess I'll just like rewind a little bit about like my life and sort of where like I started, which was I started my career like in international development and social sciences. I really wanted to do good in the world. I ended up doing some consulting work in Africa, consulting for the government of Liberia as they were transitioning to democracy. Worked in South Africa for the former president of South Africa on democracy transparency issues. And then, I really wanted to build my career in the area of international development, working for the UN, working for a multilateral organization. But as I was kind of going down that path, I ended up getting recruited by a hedge fund. So that's how I ended up in the corporate world.
Whoa.
Worked on Wall Street, mostly in like technology, product, finance roles, operations, and then ended up at like a large conglomerate where I was an executive and in strategy and product and operations, many different areas. And basically in 2016, I just kind of burnt out, and
There it is. Yeah.
like I just felt like I was working like crazy. And
What's crazy? How many hours are we talking about?
well, at that point, I was probably working like, somewhere between 80 to 100 hours a week, I would say, but I wasn't sleeping. I slept 1 to 2 hours a night. And like, I'm not
What?
exaggerating. It was like really, really bad. And what I realize now, like I thought it was a job, which it was, part of it was a pressure, but it's like, it was really more about the internal pressure and the thing, stuff within me that was kind of driving me to work so hard and to succeed and do all these things. I enjoyed the work that I was doing, but I was kind of torturing myself in a way. So fast forward, I went down, like I left, I spent a year kind of being nomadic, lived all around the world and took on different projects, and then ended up in LA, where the first year I lived in LA, I lived in like 8 different places because I was so lost, like trying to figure things out. And so I started consulting, which for me really meant I've never really been like a consultant who advises and leaves. Like I've always joined an organization and really helped them drive like change within the organization, taking on like initiatives and stuff. And so I worked with a couple different organizations. In the last couple years, I've worked with this private equity firm, TPG, where I've helped them like lead different strategic initiatives. A lot of them are like focused more on like technology infrastructure, but overall strategy of the organization. Worked a lot with like HR and talent and culture as well, and gotten involved in like many different initiatives as they've been kind of working on the next stage of their growth. And so concurrently, in 2021, like during the pandemic, I ended up, I started releasing music as well. And so that was like,
Nice.
that was, kind of a passion project that kind of came to life like relatively recently.
Dude, Grace, you're badass.
Hey, that's a tall
That's
resume.
like a very like long-winded way of answering your question.
No,
but
I love
No,
that.
that
it
was
was like
great.
hard for
Yeah.
me to answer it without giving some context as to like the why, you know?
That's
we
a great
like
elevator pitch. You know?
And this is why you should hire me.
Yeah, exactly. When you're a consultant for that long for an organization, are you like usually the sole consultant? Since I'm sure they trust you throughout the term of your stay there.
Yeah. Usually, like, I don't even like to use the word consultant because I really do feel like I'm part of the organization rather than a consultant. I'm technically like a senior advisor, but I'm not really advising. I'm really like leading projects for them.
Yeah.
And so usually I do that independently, but recently I've been working on maybe like building out my consulting firm in line with Parasol and focusing a little less on like the business strategy stuff, but more around how we can transform corporations to be like kinder, more human like places. So
Sorry.
that's sort of like what I'm thinking about at the moment is just reorienting my focus in that way.
Yeah.
It's funny. I see so many people have a similar trajectory when they're like super into corporate, they're hustling, they're getting in all those hours and they're finding success, they're executives. And then there comes this point where they just burn out.
Yeah.
And then you go this kind of other route, trying to find like maybe like happiness or kindness or like kind of maybe a little more like hippie movement, where you're like more trying to find like what really makes you tick as a person. And I see it play out so much, especially here in LA. Like you see
Yeah.
people who were like these executives and now they're like, all about like, meditation, all about finding like what really makes them happy, like changing their actual lifestyles. And you said something about how it was really something like in you that was like, why you were working all these hours.
Yeah.
Why you were like, trying really hard and sleeping 2 hours a day and like, putting in these 80-hour days. What is that was in you that was telling you to do that?
Yeah, I think like a lot of people escape themselves through things like whether it's workaholism or alcoholism, like through different means to help them like kind of numb from what is actually going on beneath the surface. And for me, I think like I know we're kind of going deep, like already going deep with this with this stuff, but like I grew up in. My parents were Korean. They were immigrants. They always emphasized hard work, education, all of those things. I also had a pretty tough childhood where I experienced like a lot of violence and abuse, and my mom was schizophrenic. And so the way that I sort of escaped all of that was really by working hard and getting out of those circumstances. So when I was 14, I got pretty much a full scholarship to a boarding school.
Whoa.
Yeah, and so I left home, and like if you just look at my resume, I think you will see like, oh wow, she was successful and she like went to this school and she went to this Ivy League. She had an Ivy League education and she had this trajectory. But the reality is that I came from a really destructive like home life, and my options were either like like it was pretty desperate. So it was either like okay, like I was really depressed and either it was something had to give, and that was my way out of there. So
Oh, wow.
and I think that's what drove me that achiever, that that like needing to stay a couple steps ahead and be really practical, and then seeking external validation and all of those things. And then eventually it's like, okay, I needed to kind of like come to terms with what was going on within me too. So, and work on my own like healing as well. Mhm.
It seems like you're significantly farther in your healing journey now,
Yeah.
And the fact that you can like recognize and like have that kind of self-awareness, because I think we all kind of like have maybe not, I know you have a similar background in that kind of sense.
Yeah, I went the complete opposite
Yeah.
way of you. You know how you grew up in like a destructive household. It's very similar. I actually just talked about this story that I never really told anyone, but like when I was younger, abusive household. Like my dad was physically abusive. My mom was a little bit manipulative, and at this point, my mom had told me, "Hey," because my dad works like long hours, like 18, 19 hours a day.
Oh, wow.
He does like construction, so like physical labor. And he would just come home like extremely irritated, and he just wants to relax, and when he can't relax, he's very uptight. And my mom had just gone through a little streak of where she was kind of getting abused, physically abused. And she had told me, hey, like, your pops is probably gonna kill me today if you don't call the cops on him. And I think I was like 15, maybe 14, 15. So I called the cops, and I was like, hey, like, my mom's scared for her life. Like, my dad's been an abuser. Can you guys come help? Not knowing really what I was doing. I was just listening to what my mom asked me. So then, my pops came home. He was exhausted, but he was also like on edge. And then cops came. I remember, like, he opened up the door and he was like, what the hell? Like, it was 3 or 4 cops, I believe. And they just talked about like domestic violence case, and they like tackled him to the ground, like dragged him out of the house. And he just looked at me and he was like, this is you. Like, this is your fault. Like, I know you called the cops, because mom didn't really speak English. So, like, I grew up in that kind of household, and I went the completely opposite direction. Like, didn't focus on academia at all. I actually just wanted to be out doing hood rat shit with my hood rat friends, So that's the way I grew up. And, very similarly, I had to address those, I guess, demons, those problems a lot later in life, though. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure, like, where you came to terms with it. I think I'm still kind of fighting it now in my, like, late 30s. But, I think I realized I had an issue with it in my mid-20s. And that's when I slowly started addressing it. Still not understanding what exactly was going on inside my own head, though.
Well, I'm like over idealizing it in a way. I mean, I did focus a lot on like my academics, but I also like I feel like I was kind of lost in many ways, and like that was part of the picture, and there was a lot more going on too. But yeah, and I think like there's just always like layers and layers and layers to peel off. Like no matter how much work you do and how much you focus on it, there's still like you can still take it a level deeper. And like the perspective I have on it is like I went through all of that so that I could like go deeper within myself, and then take that and like the lessons and some of the meaning, and like do good for the world. And that's like what I hope to do. Yeah.
Was there
that's why you try to do so good in the world.
Was there a specific event that you remember that you're like, oh, why am I doing all this? Was there a specific day, turning point where something just clicked and you're like, I know I'm working really hard. I'm working hell hours. I'm probably making people around me proud, but this is not it.
Yeah, I think the turning point, there were like a few different key moments. Like I think I woke up every day feeling such a sense of responsibility for other people and to like the commitments that I'd made to people, and I was like so self-sacrificing in a way about that. But the turning point, I was in Whistler in 2016. I was on vacation, visiting a friend, and I didn't do anything. I just worked the entire time. I was on calls. And I remember I was like so screwed up in how I was thinking about the world in a way. And I remember seeing like people having a great time skiing and just being like not even being able to comprehend why they were having such a good time. I was like, this is really like, I am in a really weird mental space to be like thinking along those lines. And I was dealing with a lot of politics at the time, and I got an email, and I just said, I am so done. And then I sent my resignation in pretty much that day, I think.
During the Whistler trip.
Yeah, I didn't. I teed up the resignation. I didn't actually send it, or maybe I did. I can't quite remember, but yeah. It was like crazy. That was when the decision happened, at least. Yeah.
Was it like, I'm so sick and tired of you bitches, I'm done, I'm out?
No. It was much. It's like very polite. Okay. Yeah.
You just slam down a paper.
Yeah. That's wild. So, I have a question. It sounds like you went through a lot of this on your own, but also, were there people close to you that noticed this fatigue and this wear down?
Yeah.
So other people point out.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
But it's like, I think at that time I was living in New York City, and it was almost like almost like a badge of honor thing, like how little you were sleeping and how much you were working, and it was almost like how tough, like how much I could do in a week. It felt almost like a competition with myself in a way too. And people saw that, but I also think I had a lot of people's respect in that way. And so I didn't necessarily see it as a sign to like focus on my own self-care, you know?
Oh, so it was more like a validation, like, wow, Grace went out there and she worked 100 hours this week, and it's like, who else is gonna hustle her?
It's like
right?
a toxic respect.
Well,
Maybe,
the hustle
yeah.
culture, and especially
it's
in New York,
still-
is probably a little bit
Yeah,
different.
that's what I was
right?
gonna point out. In New York, especially, it's like you either make it or you're just gonna be dead in the streets out there, especially out there because everybody is just hustling to get the next bag. So, do you think that was part of the issue as to why you were keeping up with everybody or the environment actually and
True.
the culture?
I think the biggest thing was that I felt such a sense of responsibility. Like I had been given like a big role, and I didn't want to let anyone down. And like I kind of embraced it with a certain level of like idealism and innocence. And then I think having, after being in it for like a year or two, it sort of started to like break down a bit,
Yeah.
And it's like I was very internally conflicted between like what I felt like I needed to do for other people and what I needed to do for myself,
Yeah.
And I just really thought about it as like, okay, just like wait like another year, a couple years, or like I was constantly like focusing on the future rather than like and sacrificing my present happiness.
Oh, wow. Do you remember the first time that you were able to take a breather and process that enjoyment that you were talking about that you couldn't do in Whistler?
Well, I think after I left, I spent about like a month in San Francisco, and I just relaxed. I didn't talk to anyone. I just went to yoga. Like I just got out of New York, and then I kept coming back to New York, and I immediately felt like I needed to leave, and so
Whoa.
I was feeling pretty lost. Like there was one day where I booked tickets to so many different places. I was like, where should I go? And I booked tickets to like Bali, and then I'd cancel it. Then I booked a ticket to
Oh.
like Japan and cancel it. Like I was, my frame of mind was
That was
like
in one day?
all in one day. Yeah.
Oh, holy
Yeah.
cow. So I'm curious. You're married now?
Yeah.
Were you with your husband back then? During that time?
No. I was in an 11-year relationship.
Oh,
But
wow.
that ended like before 2016. So,
Okay.
so I had like this 11-year relationship that ended when I was 30. And then I had this kind of like trajectory of career growth. And then I left in 2016. And then I met my husband in 2019.
Oh, wow, 3 years later. At this point, was he still kind of seeing maybe like a resemblance of the person you were prior? Or at this point, did you completely change and you're like, hey,
I was pretty different. Although
Yeah?
like he likes to joke that like when he met me, I was like kind of a robot. That's like one of our jokes. But
Really?
You were a robot?
Why is that?
I guess like
The trauma.
I think I had a hard time like really showing my emotions, and I think part of like my journey of like being like expressing myself creatively and music like opened me up. And but no, like when by the time he met me, I was starting to like produce, and like I was a lot more open.
How did you get into producing? And
Yeah, it was slowly. When I was younger, it was like always my dream to make music, and so I played piano and I sang in choirs, but I also had a lot of self-consciousness around that, and I just like stopped. And when I was 18, I just kind of like I stopped singing. I wouldn't even sing in the shower. I just didn't do anything for like almost 20 years. And
okay, sing right now. show us your growth.
Hey, she got pipes.
yeah, and then like when I left, I remember I was in Bali, and
So you did end up going.
Yeah, I did end up going eventually to Bali. I went actually 3 times that year. I went to
nice.
Bali, and I was just like sitting by the beach in my room, and I just decided that I wanted to start singing again. So I started singing.
What age were you when
When that happened, like maybe 34 or something like
Okay.
that.
I wanted to put that out there so people out there who feel like maybe they're
Yeah.
too old to start or anything. I'm like, dude, you're starting at 34. Like, that's
Yeah.
great. It's never too late to start.
Oh,
you
it's
know?
never too late.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
start tomorrow. I'm gonna take voice lessons. I really am.
Maybe some people are too old. Just kidding.
So I went from that to like writing songs and then producing, and like it was interesting because I didn't really understand that production was a thing. Like, you hear like a song. I like had no concept of how something like that like got put together. The fact that there's like software like Ableton and Logic and but when I like realized that was a thing, like I thought it was so cool that you could just make whatever you want just electronically, and so I just really wanted to learn. Yeah, are you?
Wow.
You're in music too, right? Or yeah.
Oh no, I'm not really in music. So I run an event company that has everything to do with music. I'm just a big fan. So then I get to work with artists without having to put any pressure on myself. That's the way I usually work. But no, I always admire that about people. For me, I'm not really in the limelight kind of person. I'm just more in the background. So
Sir, you have a
do
podcast.
events, I know. But
Really bright lights right here.
if we were in the podcasting realm, like 6-7 years ago when it wasn't video too, I probably would have kept it just all audio, to be honest. But now that it is, we just kind of roll with the punches, and I guess I have to be in the lights. But back then it wasn't that case. That wasn't the case. Like I love doing things and I love putting things together. I love seeing how people react to this and just being in the background. That's why I talked to you about events earlier and how people don't understand and how many moving parts there are to events and how much stress and pressure you go under. Because you have to put on like a smiley face for them to see.
Oh, yeah.
They come in, you're just like, how's the event? You're like, great. You know what I mean? Like
There's 3 other people here. Great.
putting out like all these fires. You're like, how are you gonna make your money back? The venue's asking like, what's going on? Artists is showing up late, sound issues. Like, he was like, oh crap, there's so many moving parts. But that's what I really enjoy. Like, I think that's my love of music and dance is what got me to the point where I did want to create these events. And also the fact that I threw parties all the time when I was younger kind of really helped out. But now seeing that you're also doing events, like how did that end up happening?
Yeah. So I was in this community called Future Self. It's like a meditation community, and I was part of this incubator, like accelerator program. And I was a mentor. And basically the way that it worked was like there was 4 weeks of doing like more like inner work, and then 4 weeks of working on a project or a prototype of something that you wanted to create. So I'd been in that like program for a while, and I had like that's what really helped me kind of unlock a lot of my like artistry and wanting to like allowing myself to pursue music and all of that. And once I'd like put stuff out, I realized I wanted to do something for others in like a similar way. And so I had this idea for a prototype, which was to create this like mini festival. And so yeah, I hosted one kind of at my house, and it was like amazing, and we had like amazing speakers and music, and we did this whole like visualization thing, and it was a lot of fun. And so from that prototype, like that's what started Parasol. Yeah.
Oh, it makes sense.
So a lot of the skills you developed throughout your years working for corporate, you're translating it now into your creative journey, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to, but I think it's a really hard process because like I feel like I am so good at working on businesses that are like more B2B, practical, kind of boring in some ways, but useful. Like that's where like a lot of my expertise has been. And like anything that's more like creative, artistic, or even like, I recently got certified in breathwork, anything that's around like helping people or, being creative, I feel like I almost have like a business block around it, right? Like I don't, it's like hard. Like I don't want to like charge people or like, things like that. Yeah. So that's been like hard. Like I have no problem charging companies and stuff. Like that's fine. But I think with wanting to do good for others, like I have this desire to give, and I'd love for that to like grow into something more.
Yeah.
But like,
like a
internally
balancing
it's just
act,
like
right?
hard to like figure out like how do I do that, and I'm
Yeah.
like learning that whole process, you know.
No,
I'm
that
sure
makes
that's
sense.
fun too, though. Like
Yeah.
experiencing that, and learning as you go. How are you going to meld your old skills with the new skills that you're trying to find and incorporate together, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it'll all come together, you know, at some point. So
I'm sure it's hard to put a monetary price on helping someone where it's like, oh, I'm providing this service and I know it's going to help you, but oh, it's too expensive for you. Shit, I can't help you.
yeah, exactly. Or like I did my first breathwork session this past weekend for someone, and like she wanted to pay me, and I was like, no.
I do know what you mean about that. Sometimes like so I used to write a lot and I would work, in the morning or something. It's hard to switch, like to be creative, going from like, okay, I got work to do, I gotta, handle like my business side of stuff. And then like, oh, okay, now I gotta be creative. And it's always been so hard for me to make that jump. I would need to do it in like different days. I'm okay, I'm not gonna work today. Today's just for creativity. And when I don't, but those days are rare, sometimes like I have to work and then I want to be creative after. But I always found that block too, like just preventing me from being as good as I am on days where I'm like, oh, I'm not going to do any work today.
Yeah, it's really hard, like because creativity requires like space and for you to be in flow, and and then this other stuff is like very like task, structure, response, like being responsive, and it's like tapping into those energies or alternating between those energies can be like it's just like I just let it all flow now. Like I will like I will cut vocals and then immediately get on a conference call. Like yeah, like it's crazy.
While
Like,
singing on the chorus call.
it's like,
Hi, this is Grace.
So you're like compartmentalizing your sort of tasks and the creative tasks as well? Is that where you're
I
kind
think
of...
yeah, I think I'm just like project managing everything, which is
Yeah.
like I'd like to kind of get away, like a little bit away from, instead of being like, okay, I'm gonna cut these vocals. I have 1 minute left. I'm gonna do one more take. Okay, and then now I'm on a Zoom. Like
Dude, that's so tough.
it's hard.
You're switching flows a lot.
Yeah.
But you're trying to also take it in a way where you're not thinking too much of which flow you're at, right?
It's tough. Yeah.
Has meditation helped you with that?
I think so. Like, I think what's really helped is that I used to be so compartmentalized as a person in general. So it's like, depending on like what context you met me in, you would think I was like a different person because I felt like, okay, this is
robot.
Robot. Business me, and then there's like, okay, creative me, and then there's like spiritual me, and what's helped is like that over time, that's all broken down. I feel like I am me now more like regardless of the context. Like I don't feel like I have to put on a certain persona or anything. And like I think by doing that, some things have suffered. Like I'm a little less type A than I was in the past, but I take a more like I think I just take a more like artistic approach towards like life, including like things that I'm doing more in a business capacity. Like I feel I'm not as like organized as I once was, but I feel like I'm approaching things in a
So you're a recovering type A.
yes. Yeah.
I see a little subtle type A energy just over there,
So you mentioned earlier that you finished like a course for breath work. Do you want to go into that?
Yeah, sure. A friend of mine told me that she's done a lot of work. She's done a lot of like ceremonies, ayahuasca, a lot of different things. But she said the person who's made the biggest difference in her life was this guy, David Elliott. And I was like, okay, wow, I'm going to go see him. And started doing like one-on-one breathwork sessions with him. And he also is, happens to be like really well regarded in the breathwork community. And a lot of the teachers actually learned from him. So I decided to sign up. I had no intention of being like a breathwork like facilitator, but I just wanted to check it out. And in May, I went for an 8-day certification, 6 levels. And it was really intense. It was like 8 hours a day of kind of like learning, being in a circle with incredible people, and also kind of holding space for people, and kind of being the recipient of it too.
Yeah.
And what was interesting was the first day when I was in a circle with the entire group. The question came up like, what is your like intention for being here? And I was doing the reading earlier that day, and what came up for me was like, one of the questions was like, have you like forgiven your parents or something like that? So I was like, wow, that is like probably, I know I haven't, so that's probably the intention. And as we were like going around introducing ourselves, like I just started crying. I just had like, I couldn't even talk. I just started crying that first day. And, the week went by and like I was breathing every day. Like I was having really cool experiences, but it was the second to last day that I had this really like transformative experience where I was breathing and all of a sudden I saw like a little girl like pop up into my image, like into just my field of vision. And I was like, who is that? And I realized it was my mother as a little girl. And in that moment, I felt so much compassion for this woman who, in my life has caused me a lot of pain. And I saw her life kind of unfolding in front of my eyes. And I saw myself like rescuing her from certain situations. Like I don't know if this is real or not, but this is what came up. Like I saw this image of her being sexually assaulted, and that I went into that situation and kind of like rescued her from that. And then I saw her like life kind of pass in front of me, and I then suddenly found myself seeing an image of my house, like in Massachusetts. Like when I was young, one day my parents woke me up, and when I was living in New York, and just moved me to Massachusetts that same day without me saying goodbye to anyone. So like there was this. So I relocated to Massachusetts, and so that house kind of like appeared in front of me, and I was remembering all of these different details and like my relationship with my dad, and like it was a really cool experience because I've done a lot of therapy where you're talking about an issue, but it's totally different than you experiencing something in a different way. And that's kind of what happened in that breathwork session. And I had this feeling like I've never felt so much compassion for my parents, and realizing how I have hurt myself by cutting myself out, like off from my past. If that makes sense. It's like because at like age 14 or whatever, I was like, fuck them, I'm out, I'm moving forward, I'm never looking back. And how that had like hindered me. And that was sort of like the key, is that, okay, maybe it's time to like really accept my past in a way that I've never been able to do before.
It's amazing how it's like your own psyche is helping you heal. You're doing this practice, and it's your mind showing you the right things you need to do.
Yeah.
It's like I believe we're like, tied to the universe, or tied to, something maybe greater than us, that like, what you need to do is right. Like it's telling you, like you're using this breath work, and it's like showing you like how to be compassionate, face your past, like, get to that point where like you can really like acknowledge these things. And did you?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I took a lot of action from it. Like with anything where you get a message, but then you have to sort of like do something with that, right? Because that will fade really quickly. Like even now, I'm feeling the resistance. Like right afterwards, it's like, I gotta call my dad.
Yep.
I gotta do this. I'm gonna I have a half sister in South Korea, and she has 2 kids. And I had all of these things that I needed to do. And it's like, now, I'm still taking action on those things, but it's like you have to remember it, and even when you don't want to face it, like, and continue to like.
It
push on
fades
it.
so quickly. There's this like little like moment where it's like you're feeling it, and me and one of our other guests, we talked about like when you've done shrooms and stuff, you get this sense of awareness, and you realize all these things that you need to face. All the things you need to take action, and while you're on it, you're like, yeah. I'm gonna do this. Yeah, I know exactly what it is. This is, and you get an idea, like a future idea of like this is how it's gonna turn out. But once that trip ends, and like there's a brief moment right there where you can take action. Otherwise, you kind of go back to how you were feeling before, and it becomes so much harder to actually do it.
Yeah.
And I've gotten to that point too where I'm like, now I know when I feel it, I'm like, just gotta do it now. You just gotta do it that moment or within that hour, because if not, you're not gonna do it.
Yeah.
So with breath work, What is the practice? Like, what is the rhythmic breathing that they do?
Yeah, the pattern that I do or that I learned is really simple. It's like through the stomach, through the chest, and yeah.
Wait.
Yeah, so
Wait,
it's not.
can,
But
can
you
you
have to, like,
can you
you have
can
to
you
lay
lead
down.
us through a quick little
Sure.
mini breath work? Let's do it.
Yeah,
I'm
I
gonna bust
wonder.
out crying right now. Just watch.
Okay, so I guess we can breathe together for a few rounds, but
Okay.
I mean, normally you'd be laying down, but we
Yeah.
could just do it together anyway. So it's, and through this pattern, you kind of bypass the mind.
Is it stomach, chest?
Stomach, upper chest, exhale. And basically what it is like through like the first 10 minutes, you like your mind is still like gripping in a way. And after about 10 minutes, that starts to kind of fade away. You go more into your body and you can feel more like spirit or energy kind of flowing through you. And that's when like a lot of things that like are stuck can kind of start to come loose. So, people will involuntarily start crying or laughing or convulsing. Or have you done breath work or?
Lightly. I mean, it's crazy because the first time I ever heard of breathwork was because of the Wim Hof thing.
The wish.
And, the ice band.
Oh,
never?
the ice dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen it? His get-together, his gathering is like, it's kind of like small group of people. And they go into the whole breath work, and then they all have very different, crazy reactions. And he was saying that that's like one of the most powerful things because they say there's a lot of adrenaline that comes out of it, and your body just changes, and that's why he's able to do all these insane things like swim underneath like a bunch of like ice and run in like the mountains where it's freezing just with like a pair of shorts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think one thing I want to ask you about that is because I know you seem like a very logical human being. You seem you're smart. You went through a lot of like trials as far as like how you came as a business person, but not also as a person from academia. Doing something that's like breath work is definitely more on what I would call like the spiritual like area of
More
things.
woo. More
Yeah,
woo.
like how if it was me, because I'm very similar in that way, I would be like, why? Like why? What's causing my body to do this? And I'm one of those people where it's like I have to question it. Like, did you do that too when you were going through this, or it was just something that you just kind of took a chance and tried?
In this particular case, like I just took a chance and tried it. I didn't like look too deeply into like the science of breath work and no, yeah, I just experienced it and like I've been kind of on my whole spiritual journey for a while now and
Oh, really?
I think there definitely was a point in time where I felt like science had to validate everything. And then I had some of my own experiences, kind of spiritual experiences where I realized like it doesn't, I don't think breathwork necessarily applies to that, but I started to realize there are kind of like greater forces at play that are not always explicable, at least through what science, through scientific studies that necessarily exist today,
Yeah, that's funny because the way you're explaining it, and I mentioned this off camera, like the Rick Rubin book, he talks about all these things, but in a creative aspect, which is so interesting. Because you know how you said once you did breath work, you kind of get this message assigned to do this or that. And he speaks about it where he says, don't try and analyze these things.
Yeah.
Like you just want to lean into it because like the world is telling you something. And what you're supposed to do is the more you practice this, like your body's just a vessel, you're able to cling on to these sounds, these messages more clearly. But every time you try to analyze it, especially when it's coming to you at that moment, you take yourself out of that.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I like
totally.
that.
That's what he talks about.
I think that's where I fall in a trap too, where it's like I try and like, oh, what's the reasoning behind this, or like why this seems too like woo or spiritual or whatever, like is sound bath really working? Like I need to like analyze it for it to like really like understand it for me to work for me, but that's not always true.
It's like a form of like resisting it.
It is a form of
yeah,
resistance.
that's what he calls it. very similarly, and I'm always like that. So I do photography, and for me, like I'm always like analyzing like an image, but sometimes I just feel it. Sometimes I'm like, this just feels right. I'm getting something more out of this. But in my head, I'm trying to be logical and like, why not put this in the rule of thirds? It should be more, aesthetically pleasing to the eye. It should grab more attention. But for some reason, I'm trying to learn how to not be dissecting all these images and just kind of feel it out, And I feel like that's hard for a lot of us, especially for me. I always had to give a reason to everything because I feel like sometimes life is very unreasonable. Like, why do things happen? I have to formulate my own so that way I could cope and like move on.
Right.
We talked about this with like about one of our friends passing. He passed like on like in the most tragic way, right? Like 25th birthday, just got a brand new job. Everyone loves this guy, right? He leaves his job, gets in a car accident, passes. Like, how does that happen at that time when he was supposed to be at the peak or starting his life, not even the peak, starting his life? And I couldn't rationalize it. I couldn't figure out any way where I'm like, what is the purpose? And what I told myself, and just like Mario would hear all the time, it's like, oh, he gave us kind of like a more of a reason to be better because that's what he would do, and that's his message from whatever happened. Because other than that, I wouldn't be able to cope with it because I'm like, that's just tragic.
Yeah,
and
that
there's
is
no
tragic.
other
I'm
reason.
sorry. Yeah.
No, we've been talking about it a lot, and that's like another thing that I've learned too is like to speak about these things because really enough, having an outlet, it doesn't have to be necessarily like speaking directly about a certain subject, but having something for you to focus your energy on that is an outlet really helps out, at least for me, and I always find something creative to do, whether it's photography or dance or something that I always kind of go towards when I feel these certain emotions. Because weird enough, I don't think a lot of people understand that if you keep things in, whether you're not writing about it, speaking about it to someone else, creating something, it affects you physically.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Like people feel sick, people feel tense. When we have a chiropractor who came on and he feels people out like very well. Like he could, touch you and be like,
You feel toxic.
He feels their
like,
energy.
You're really stressed. Is this a financial thing? And I'm like, how? And very similarly, I asked him like, how do you know these things? Like, so it's pretty strange, right? He's like, no, I just know. And he said he just practices to a point where it just like it gets clearer. I guess very similarly to the Rick Rubin thing. It just gets you there as long as you lean into like what it's saying. He says some people just call it intuition, but for him it's just something. It's practice, intuition, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, I think too, like, we all want to like control on some level, like outcomes or not. What I think is interesting about like creativity or staying open or being open to intuition is like you can end up in a completely different place than you would have if you like planned something out. Like I'm just thinking about like making music, like thinking like, oh, I'm just gonna do this one thing, and then I completely rewrite the entire song, and it ends up this like completely different thing than what like 2 hours later than what I come in and wanted to do, and like I don't feel like that always happens with more like task oriented things too, and so yeah, I think being open to like spirit or I don't know, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
Man, I've been doing the breathwork kind of this whole time. Ooh, it's got me.
Yeah. I kind of ask you. So you're married now. When you met your husband, you were in a different place. Is he more similar to the you back then, or the you that he had met at that time?
Is he similar?
Yeah. So back then you were more focused on like work. You didn't really think too much about creating. You got back into singing. Prior to that, the person that wasn't singing, the person that was overworking, the person that was
Yeah.
burnt out, the person that had to find a reason for fulfillment in life, was he more similar to that person, or is he more similar to you now?
It's interesting. He's always been a creative. So like he started producing when he was 10.
Oh wow.
Wow.
Yeah, and he's Swedish. He moved to LA and, has been like a full-time, composer, music producer, artist. And the person we were both, I think, a little bit closed off in certain ways, like when we first met. And I think our relationship really helped us like open up. And, you know, because I think the person you end up with, like whether it's temporary or, you know, for a lifetime, is such a mirror to like the things that you need to work on within yourself, you know? And like, so the things that would be triggered in me would be like the things that he triggered in me, like I realized I needed to work on a bunch of things and vice versa. And so through that process, I think we've not only gotten closer, but like just become like better people, you know,
Wow.
like more aware. And that's like what our project is about. Like we have like a band and we like worked on all these songs together, and that's been sort of the process of us like evolving as, you know, evolving together. So
How has being band members affected your like romantic relationship?
it's been amazing. You know, it really has been. And the whole project was sparked because I was so upset with him one day. And like it was, I don't know, December 2021. I was really upset with him. I literally like wanted to get a divorce. I was like very upset.
Oh,
And he had written this song, like started to write this song called Simple Love. And the next day we ended up working on it together, and it ended up becoming like a duet. The first song off our now EP that we just released the first song for, and we didn't intend to have this whole like EP, but we ended up making more songs about the things that we were going through. Like our next single is called Monster, and it was really inspired by like our own inner demons. And we were like us joking, like kind of joking about like how we're both crazy and like, you know, so yeah. And like now we're in such a good place. We're having worked on that project and working together. It's like, we're just, I feel really lucky, honestly, because he's amazing as like, he's a great human, great husband, my best friend. Literally, like we spend so much time together, and like I enjoy, like we have a blast.
Is there a sense of hesitancy when you guys are creating lyrics? You know, because I'm assuming you're trying to be open, you're trying to be, you know, creative, and there's uncomfortable stuff. I mean, one of your songs is called Monster.
Yeah.
Like I'm sure, you know, you said jokingly, but I'm sure there's truths to like, you know, maybe some of the relationship aspects. Is there a hesitancy to put it all out there? Like, is it like, oh, I don't want to talk about this, or like I don't want to like, you know, really like put this out into the world?
For the most part, no. You know, I think there have been like little things. I think the process of collaborating too has been, it's been like instructive, because I think when I used to be really, really shy around him about anything, like with regard to like singing or writing. And like, I think there was a point last year where he asked me to sing something, and I got so anxious that I just started crying. And like, and then we wrote a whole song that was just about that. Yeah, it's like me, like it's just like I feel
Why
like
I cry when I sing.
it's like, yeah, I just started crying, and like we wrote a whole song about like just singing and like the fear of using like my voice and everything. So yeah, so that was an interesting one. And but now we have like a better rhythm with things. Like I write a lot of lyrics, and he always like starts like the instrumental. So we kind of have a good groove going at this point, you know?
that's cool. I gotta ask you, how do you go from being so pissed off on a divorce to making a song the next day? Because when I'm in that mood, I'm like, I do not want to talk to you, much less sing in front of you.
Well, you haven't heard her music, right? It's actually like hardcore death metal.
I mean, it's like, it's funny. Like, I think we have such good communication at this point. Like, it took a while to get there, that there's like, so like, we feel really safe kind of saying whatever to each other, you know, in like
awesome.
in a constructive way, of course, but like, you know, being so mad and then actually feeling heard. Like, he didn't argue with me about it. You know, he just like listened, and we talked about it. And then the next day, you know, we ended up writing the song together. Like, so sometimes like our like arguments or things can like linger, but for the most part, like they don't linger for too long. Like, I think that's the important thing is like being able to like listen and hear each other out and actually the other person, feeling respected.
Is that because you guys started making music together, or was that always just the case?
It was always the case. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like it's been a progression, but yes.
Seems like it would be like a form of journaling, Because you're writing down the experience into lyrics and you're probably refining it as you go and you start probably realizing more of how the situation really played out. And then it becomes something, an end product that you're both really satisfied and want to put out for other people to experience and hear too. That's pretty wild.
That was pretty
It's
interesting.
therapeutic, like because once you've done that and then you've literally created something out of it,
Yeah.
it kind of enhances the bond, I guess, because you've taken this issue and you've turned it into something like beautiful or funny or whatever, and then it's been great.
Yeah, because you did it as a team too.
Yeah.
You did it together.
Do you guys want to make a song?
Nobody wants to hear any of those things.
I'm not a good singer.
I'm actually tone deaf. You're Filipino. You could sing.
I'm the basketball Filipino.
It's funny that you said you couldn't really sing it for him. One of my relationships, that's how I was. I could not sing in front of her, but I could sing in front of anyone.
Really?
Except for her at that point. Yeah, it was weird. It would not come out. I think she heard me once or twice, but I think I was so drunk I forgot she was there. That's the reason why I sang. We were karaoke, I was singing my heart out, and then she's like, "Oh my god, you sang in front of me." I'm like, "No, I didn't. That wasn't me. I was just lip syncing." But yeah, I don't think I ever got over that with her. But it was very interesting that you said that. 'Cause
Why do you think that was just with her?
I don't think it was just her. I think it was a combination of my past relationships and her included. I'm like, I always mention I'm a very like untalented guy.
Oh, come on.
No, seriously.
No, he
it's
really
like,
is.
Yeah. It's like, everything takes me a
His
very...
photography,
Yeah.
his dancing, his social skills.
He's like, all right, bro. He's like, chill.
Everything takes me a very long time to grasp. And for me to be mediocre at it takes me a lot of effort too. And, in the past, I go back then, I remember going to prom with one of my exes and I was trying to dance, but I didn't know how to listen to music while dancing. I just listened to every single beat and I moved to every single beat that there was, right?
That's
Not
still
knowing
me.
how to translate it. And my ex was like, "Can you stop dancing, please? Like, you're embarrassing me."
Oh.
So then I think it took me a long time to get past that.
Shout out to Carolyn.
Hey, just leave out that name. And then my next ex was like, "Oh my God, you can't sing," And I was like,
no.
"Oh my God." So I think those things like carried on for a while before I was able to get over it. Like even the dancing aspect, like I'm not good at dancing by any means, but
No,
now
he is.
I
You
got
are.
to I
You're
got
good
to the
at
point
it.
where like I don't care what I look like. I'm like I love it. I love to do it, so I'm going to do it anyways. So that's how I always see things, and I'm very similar to you in a way where it's like I don't think it's ever too late to really start on anything. I didn't start dancing till I was like 22. I didn't start my photography like until I was like 25, 26. I picked up everything super late.
He literally has like a torn ACL and an MCL, and he was like in a dance circle this last weekend, just like doing all his
Yeah,
moves.
I shouldn't have done. Don't show Wayne this episode. He'll be mad at me. But yeah, it's very interesting how that could affect a person. Like I'm not sure if that's exactly what happened. If I were to chalk up to anything, that's what I would think. I'm not sure why specifically with her. It's super difficult because I think maybe that's the person I'm the most vulnerable to at that point, and that's why I didn't. Maybe logically in my mind, I was like, I don't want to disappoint her by letting her hear what I sound like.
That's so funny.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I actually know that I'm a bad singer and a bad dancer, and when I do go on a date or something, I make sure we usually go to karaoke and then go dance after, so that right away. I'm not trying to hide this. I'm still gonna do it, but I'm not good at it. So I wanted to ask a little bit about the type of music you guys are making, and aside from your guys' relationship, the inspirations and what your goal is for it.
Yeah. So I have two projects. Like one is a band with him, which is more like indie kind of folk, like has this sort of like early 2000s feel. And, it's like, it's beautiful. And like our inspirations are, that era. And we're working on an album. So we have an EP that's coming out this year. And then we're working on an album too. So, that's really exciting. And then my solo project, which is Nolo Grace, is more like alt pop. And I'm actually finishing an album this week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I have like one more song before I leave Friday. And it's like more experimental. And like, I feel like I'm influenced by maybe like Bjork and Caroline Polachek.
Dude,
and
you
like,
give me Bjork vibes.
literally, that makes me so happy.
It was honestly the first thing I thought of when you came in. Like, talked to you a little bit. I was like, yeah, I feel that.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I love her so much. But yeah, it's like the music is definitely really out there, but like sonically, it's like out there, and it's like it feels like very big and epic and experiential, and like the lyrics are kind of like somewhat like mythical at times, and somewhat going really deep into my actual like stories and like experiences.
Mythical?
So yeah, like sort of like exploring like more like my higher self and like different realms, and like kind of hearkening on people like Joseph Campbell, who wrote like A Hero with a
Power
Thousand
Myth?
Faces. Yeah, like so there's like a
Yes.
little bit of stuff from there that like I sort of reference. And then some songs are like very real and about like my experience like with my mother. And I have this one song called Mother. That's about sort of like letting her go, you know, because I don't think I mentioned it, but she left, you know, when I was younger and stuff. So I have something about that. I have a song that's about like when I was 14, I had a boyfriend who died, and like I wrote a song about that. So there's some songs that are like very like real, and then there's some songs that are a little more like ephemeral in a way. But like, yeah. Mhm.
One, great use of the word hearkening. Two, Joseph Campbell dude, you guys should check out some of his stuff. His writing is so good. Where it's like he's telling you about like mythology and kind of like, you know, maybe anthropological topics, but the writing is so clear, concise, and imaginative. It's very creative writing for like a topic that you might think would be kind of boring. Like
Yeah.
he's actually one of my favorite writers.
What kind of topics?
A lot about mythology,
Oh,
and like
okay.
one of his famous books called The Power of Myth, and how we use myth and the mythos to like kind of empower our own lives. And I kind of took from that, where before I was very like, so I grew up Catholic, and then I got to the point where like I got older, smarter, and I'm like I tried to read the Bible, and I'm like it's kind of bullshit. I'm like a lot of stuff doesn't make sense. And I had this whole span in my like early 20s where I was like very like anti-religion, and I would go on Facebook and argue with people. and I would like I would like, you know, I'd have my Bible, like I'd have my like other, I would be inspired by like people who talk on the topics like Sam Harris, other people who are like atheists, and I'd be very like, okay, explain this to me then, you know, and I'd be very, very combative. And I read The Power of Myth, and there's this part where he talks about how like all these different religions, all these different like, you know, things that we believe, they don't necessarily have to be real to have an impact on us.
Yeah.
The purpose is not whether it's real or not. It's whether it affects you in a certain way, if it helps you develop your own spirituality. You know, if you are attaining this spiritual growth through Christianity, Catholicism, Judaism, Scientology, whatever, it doesn't fucking matter. It is a practice. It is a practice, and you are entitled to have your own practice to grow within, you know, your own spiritual growth, whatever, you know. And I read that and I was like, oh, okay, that makes more sense. And from when I read that, I was like, okay, I was less combative. I'm like, you know what, everyone's entitled to, no matter if it's true or not, you are entitled to like believe that, so that it helps you grow in whatever path you want.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, just look at people who are like super into anime. Same thing, right? Like you
Yeah,
have,
no, that's true.
Since you're young, you have how many Gokus out there, you know? You have how many people who are like fans of like Naruto, and they'll like be running around with their hands behind their back. As long as it works for you, that's fine. As long as you're not hurting anyone else.
Yep.
I don't
As long
care.
as
Because I always talk about it, like I've, you know, when I was going through that phase where I just hung out about like with a bunch of hood rats and stuff like that. Like when they would get out of that, like gang life or drugs, a lot of them would go towards like religion, you know? And I normally before I'd be like, oh, you know, I think that's could be false for you sooner or later, but I would see them cling on to it so strongly. And that was like their only way that I could see them getting out of it, is that they stuck with this, this whatever story or whatever belief they have that gave them this power to get out of it is the only way that they're gonna stick through it and not go back into that. And to me, I'm like, oh, well, they're not hurting anyone, so that's great. Like if that's what you need to use for it, like whether it's religion or exercise or breath work or meditation, go for it. It's not harming me. Like I think back then when I was younger, I just always would try to rationalize, does that make sense or not? But really, again, it goes back to it really doesn't matter. Now that you're on this path of healing, and even just recently, came past it with your husband and now being in a better space, I hear this a lot. I'm assuming it's probably be very similar for you. Do you feel like the journey just continues?
Oh yeah. Yeah, 100%. I think like you kind of like go deeper within yourself, and I think it's like I've always had that in me too, like this. That's always been the case, like not necessarily with healing, but like the seeker, like wanting more answers, like wanting to understand myself and the world, wanting to understand identity and why, how people identify in different ways, whether it's for good or even for, evil, and just like understanding that and like what mechanisms are like at work. So I think it goes deeper, and what I've found for myself is I've done a lot of work that's been either like talk therapy or kind of more energetic work. And now I feel like I'm moving into a space where it's a little bit more like about the body. So what I mean by that is like breath work is like more somatic. And I've done like ayahuasca, I've done journeys and stuff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so like now it's more about the body. I started recently doing some work that's like very somatic about like releasing a lot that helps kind of release some of like the self-protective instincts and like the armor that you build up. And that's been like a fascinating like development too,
Can you tell us about the ayahuasca experience? Because I always love hearing about that.
Yeah, of course. Like I've done it a few times. So like once I was the first time was in Costa Rica, and I was with a shaman. It was just me and my husband. We did like a private ceremony with a shaman and like his team. And it was wild. Like the first night I just slept through the whole thing. And my husband, Martin, turned in like it was crazy. Like I didn't know what was going on, but he turned into a jaguar. Like I didn't see him. I didn't see him. Yeah. But he like things were going on. I was like really scared because I hadn't seen him in this like kind of possessed way. But like afterwards, what he shared with me was like he was like inducted into the tribe, and he had become a jaguar, and he'd become a man, and he had this whole like set of instructions from conversing with like the plant, I guess he would say, of like things that he needed to change. So his instructions were really clear. For me, like I slept through the first night. The second night I experienced like entering another dimension and realm and being reborn. And that was like, and I could feel like a very deep kind of healing like happening within me. It's like really hard to explain. But it was also like pretty scary. So that like my first experience, which was like 3 nights, kind of like rocked my world, shattered me. I was a mess for 3 weeks afterwards. Like I was like shaking. I didn't want to talk to people. Like it took a while to like integrate the experience, and I still don't feel like I fully like integrated that experience.
Whoa.
But it was like very intense. And then the second like series that I did, which was like 3 ceremonies back to back, it was a lot more gentle. And honestly, I got some really weird messages. Like I had this really strange message that I was going to be part of like dismantling the capitalist system, which I thought was like really intense and very confusing to me, because I actually don't feel that I have that like inclination or desire to do that. So it was like a really weird message.
It's so funny because before you said that, like I was actually thinking about my own experiences with it, and for some reason capitalism is really tied to this, because you feel this freeness, you feel this kind of like part of you that opens up, which wants to like live in this other way where it's like more open,
Yeah.
more. It's hard to find the right exact words to say. And I haven't done ayahuasca, but I've done shrooms, and every time I experience this thing where it's like I have to go back to the corporate world. You know, I have to go back to like, you know, this capitalist. I'm not anti-capitalist or anything. You know,
Yeah,
like I like my money, but it's like it's this weird. Sometimes you fight against it. The lessons that you learned kind of contradict the kind of life you're living.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like you're trying to find like, okay, these two different things are like kind of like fighting against each other. And for me, I always try and find it sounds funny, like the metaphysical funnel of finding all that stuff, all that corporate stuff, the capitalist stuff, let it kind of like flow through me the same way you do with like, you know, your breath work, and not letting it affect my actual mental in that way where it's like I'm like I have more capacity to do more. I have more capacity to get all my stuff done, my responsibilities, my work stuff, you know, my investments, all these things that contribute to the person I am in this capitalist, you know, society. But I can also be self-aware. I can also like, you know, try and heal or try and like be a part of the natural world. And it's always there. Like sometimes I'm better at it where I can like have both interact. Sometimes it fights against me, and I feel like it like this is all stuff that like is in with like your head, you know, but it feels like it grates against like the lessons that I've learned.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I relate to that because I feel like I saw like how the world should be in a way, and like it's sort of fuzzy, but I felt like I saw the way that the world should be, and it made me really like just want things to be different and be part of that change, I think. And the other thing that I experienced was that was really powerful is I felt that like by doing the work and by sitting in ceremony and by, you know, that I was like shedding like generations of trauma, of like just everything, like in our entire lineage of like wars, genocides, the things that have like we've done to each other, like all that kind of stuff, like I could feel like purging through me, and that I was doing kind of this work for humanity in a way by participating in that. And I felt that so strongly, you know,
Like like your generational consciousness.
yeah. And so it was tough because I was feeling so sick, but it was like the sickness of not just like having taken the medicine, but rather of like our human condition and like shedding some of that. So I experienced that. I experienced like a profound, deep, like healing. It's like a hard thing to explain once again, but sort of like a lot of cleansing happening.
No, I see that, especially where it's like you are a byproduct of your parents. They're a byproduct of, you know, their parents before them. And a lot of that stuff is tainted by like trauma, by war. You know, if we're trying to put it in a like, you know, a physical result where it's like, hey, all these actions, you know, they stem from different like environmental, you know, implications, war, all that stuff. And, you know, it ends up being how you get treated, you know, and maybe doing that kind of helps you shed that. If you decide to like, you know, have kids one day and stuff, you don't have the same problems, same issues that your parents
Yeah.
had.
Do you want to have kids?
Yeah, I do. But it's like, I mean, I'm not like necessarily completely focused on it, but yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay.
I did have like a miscarriage earlier this year. So that was like a bit of a loss, but
Sorry
it was
to hear.
interesting. Like I had a lot of like sadness around it, but I also felt like this interesting experience of like, I'm going to get a little spiritual, but I felt like,
go.
the baby's like spirit left me, and that I had changed like in the process for the better. It was like a really weird feeling that I had anyway. So it wasn't that sad, you know? I felt
That's so funny. I've heard people talk about miscarriages and like, you know, very like impactful and stuff. And then I've heard my mom talk about it. She's like, yeah, there was one before you and then one after you. And I didn't realize that it was such a big deal until like I got older, because she had talked about it when I was little. She's like, yeah, there lost one before you, lost one then. And I was like, she's so nonchalant about it. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess it's normal.
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty
is,
common,
yeah.
you know, it
That's pretty
is.
cool. The reason why I asked you that is because, you know, you're going through this whole process, and you said healing is a journey, an ongoing journey at that. And I'm a firm believer that not everyone should have kids, but in your case where you're constantly working on yourself and you're trying to improve yourself, so that way, you know, your child doesn't go through the same things that you have, right? Because I see a lot of adults that they're filled with baggage and trauma that they don't
You should not have
address
kids.
at all.
Yeah.
I should definitely not have kids.
No, I didn't.
But I'm just thinking in a way where it's like not only the things that you're going through is constantly changing and you want to improve on, but the world is kind of going through a lot of stuff right now too.
Yeah.
Where I personally think it's gonna be so difficult for a lot of the younger people. Like I have younger siblings who are still teenagers, and I'm seeing the disconnect already. And I think that happens with every generation, where it's like the older folks, like back in the day, we used to go out and play outside in the baseball field, and we're like, oh, we didn't have cell phones when we grew up, but we had the Game Boys and stuff like that. I think that's constantly gonna happen, but I do think that it's definitely gonna be a different kind of world out there. That's like I don't know, for lack of a better word, like less human.
Yeah.
Because now we're interacting through our phones. It's like something that we use like every day for the most part. The people who live in regular society, I think even dating now is through a lot of apps. And then you earlier just talked about like AI stuff, right?
Right.
And even then, like I feel like it's not even just affecting the younger generations. I feel like it's even affecting some of the generations, like even our generations right now. Like there's people trying to connect with people who are just robots because they can't connect with another human.
Yeah. I mean, I heard like, an event I hosted recently on like mental health and creativity. We had a speaker who came on talking about like the impact of AI on mental health and how we are evolving from where we are today, which is more like this attention economy, like through social media and all of that, to like an intimacy economy with AI, where relationships will really be mediated through technology, and that I don't know how that's going to affect the way that we relate to each other when we may be able to get our emotional needs met through technology.
Yeah, that'd be crazy because already a lot of things are affecting us, like emotionally being able to connect. Things that people have not even noticed because that's just how societal standards change. But for instance, in Japan, there is like their pregnancy rate is probably the lowest I think it's ever been. But this has been an ongoing thing. It's nothing new. And the reason why was a lot of women decided to let's become more, work towards our corporate careers, become CEOs, be less of housewives, and because of that they weren't pursuing relationships, but that means that they're not gonna give birth because I don't want to take time away from my career. But what happened in Japan was that they had these clubs pop up. They're called host clubs. I'm not sure if you heard of them.
I don't think I know that.
Yeah. So host clubs are basically these clubs where these males they treat you like you're their girlfriend. Because, these CEOs, these, boss women still have emotional needs. So they'll go, and because they have now this higher spending power because they're climbing up the corporate ladder, they pay these guys like hundreds of thousands of dollars to pretend to be their boyfriend.
Oh, wow.
For like a couple hours. And that's something that happened due to, more women climbing the corporate ladder. And then other things came out of that. So now I think it's been a while too, but you could pay, someone to like hold your hand because there's not enough relationships out in Japan.
You'd be a terrible host boyfriend.
I would be a terrible host boyfriend, the most toxic one. But it's interesting how that works, because of that, all these things trickle down, and it ends up being that they have the lowest like birth rates in forever. But all these other products that I think Japan is just like innovative, right? They're like, okay, these people are seeking intimacy. Let's pay someone to hold hands. I saw someone who has like a pillow that hugs them because they need like intimacy.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, and it's similar in Korea too, but less about like women climbing the corporate ladder. I think there's just like gender relations in Korea, I think are just not positive. I mean, just because it's been such a patriarchal society, there is, I think that's like affected a lot, and women just don't want to get married. They don't want to be. They're kind of rejecting that whole structure. So
that's so interesting. That's why I'm so curious as to what the outcomes could be. Because also in Korea, what was happening? What I heard was that a lot of like the kids would move out of their families a lot earlier, go pursue a career, but in Korea, you grew up just having dinner with your family very, very often. So when you leave to go to school and pursue careers and you're now alone. So what happened was that mukbang became like very popular because people were used to eating with their families and people around them, but now they're like in the area where they're alone or they're they don't have a relationship, so they enjoy just watching and eating with other people, and that's how it became like a thing.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't realize that. But.
Yeah. But it's interesting. So that's what I'm saying. Like with AI, like what's gonna happen there? Because now we have AI, but we also have things like the Oculus and also the new Apple, where people are gonna. It's gonna be more real than ever. It's gonna be like Ready Player 2, or The Matrix or Inception.
That's so interesting. Because there's maid cafes. There's the intimacy with the hosting. We don't have that here in America, right? We don't have stuff like that. So we have incels who have a lot of complaints about that they feel entitled to this intimacy from women. So imagine if we put that here, what would the outcome be? But I think our outcome is actually they're just waiting for the AI tech to evolve to a point where they can meet their intimacy needs through it.
That would be
girlfriend?
wild.
I mean, AI bots are like people are just having conversations with them, like it's their girlfriend. Like
There's that one girl who she's like an influencer and she made an AI version of herself and you could date her for like $5 a minute or something like that.
What?
She made like millions of dollars.
What?
And all is just a bunch of like lonely guys who now think they're in relationships with her. They know that it's AI, but they're still willing to pay for this camaraderie and like online, right?
That's just hustle.
Yeah, so I know, crazy hustle. But you could like text her like, "Hey, honey, how's your day?" and she'll like respond back to you. You could even see her like she'll respond to you like, "Oh, I miss you. Hopefully, work is good for you." And that's just where we're at as right now with society, where it's just through text and maybe FaceTime. But the moment where you put those, the VR headsets on,
Jesus
my
Christ.
God.
that sounds like modern day,
Yesterday.
the hotlines you would call and then somebody talks to you. That's just the modern day version of it. The faster, more accessible. I don't know if it's cheaper, but
I did have a question for you guys. What is your calling? Because you have so many projects and everything, but what is the thing that motivates you to do all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's like, I think I have like a strong desire to like incorporate like healing myself, healing the world through the things that I do. And whether it's like in the realm of like business or through my art or through Parasol and like the organization I'm creating, which creates like more like safe spaces for people to connect and share, have their ideas kind of be supported and encouraged. And so I think that's like one, wanting to do good in the world is definitely a calling for me. And then on a personal, in like a more deep personal way, I think it's like creative expression too. And I think that's like something that I've been hiding from for a long time, and it is a very vulnerable thing to put yourself out there, whether it's coming on a podcast or whether it's like writing a song or whatever, like it's just easier in some ways to just hide and not take the chance of like sharing. But I think there's so much power in expressing and sharing. And so that's sort of like one of the things that I'm at least focusing on in the near term. Yeah.
Well, thank you for taking the chance with us today then.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hey guys, welcome to Lightning Round, where we ask our guests some rapid fire questions. Grace, are you ready?
Ready.
3, 2, 1.
what is your favorite food?
Pizza.
Oh, okay. What is your favorite color?
Blue.
Okay, I thought it was green because I see the
No,
matching.
I know. Yeah.
You got me. Okay. Your favorite place that you've traveled to?
Colombia?
Oh wow.
Yeah. Medellin?
No, Punta Gallinas, which is like the very tip of Colombia, and like I had to hitchhike to get there. So
I don't know. You guys
Adrian,
know?
drink.
Drink, Adrian.
The reversal is when we don't ask questions fast enough. We gotta drink.
Who inspires you the most?
my husband.
What's something that you would change about yourself if you could?
That's hard. I think I'd be a little more like fearless.
Is there a
Yes.
Is there a moment in your life that you would love to experience again?
That's really hard. I'm trying to think about that.
Drink.
Okay. I don't know. I think maybe just being out in Bali and by the water.
What are some hobbies outside of music and everything we talked about today that you do? What's something that you do that most people don't know that you like to do or enjoy? A hobby, activity.
Well, we talked about most of it, but I mean, we didn't talk about like Yoga. I like photography and visual arts as well. I like traveling.
Okay.
We did cover that a little bit, but yeah.
And then my last question for you is, what's one goal that you have for yourself for this year?
Finish my album, which I'm already planning on doing. Yeah, that's like the first thing that came to my mind.
What's one artist that you want to collaborate with?
Bjork.
York. Yeah.
Like that's gonna be
What's your
easy.
favorite thing about Bali?
The people, the culture, the spirit.
If there's one piece of advice you give to a younger version of you healing, what would it be?
Not think too hard, like not overthink things before taking a leap and just take action.
And what's the biggest piece of advice you give to someone in a marriage or in a relationship?
Just listen. Like I think the key is in really being able to make someone feel heard and to communicate and to have like the right intention, you know, not necessarily to like argue or be right or whatever, but to like really have a intention to make things better and to grow together.
All right, guys, that concludes our lightning round. I want to say thank you to our amazing guest, Grace. Thank you for sharing your journey with us. Let us know where we can find you.
You can find me at Grace X Heart on Instagram and Nolo Grace. I have a project, Grace Emoji, as well, which releasing a bunch of singles throughout the rest of this year.
I just want to say thank you for taking a chance on us.
Yeah.
I know that Justin
This
says
is
you
so
don't want to
cool.
go on the
So fearless.
podcast, but I'm glad you got on because everything you shared was it really resonated with me in one way or another. Even though I'm not very spiritual, but I feel the authenticity of what you say. So thank you for that.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Of course, of course. And thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you guys like, subscribe, and comment below what you guys want us to talk about next. And remember,
Live fast, eat ass.